It's lovely to see so many people here this evening. My name is Natalie Bennett. From 2012 to 2016, I was leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. So you don't have to sit there wondering, the accent comes from Australia originally. And I want to begin by saying that all of the science that Andy presented with earlier, I very much agree with. And I come to that from an informed background because my first degree was agricultural science. And unfortunately, there's very few people in politics from a scientific background. And we badly need more people in politics from that kind of background. But when I was first elected as leader of the Green Party, the media put that Australian origins together with the agricultural science degree. And they got very excited about the fact that I was probably the only British political leader who knew how to shear a sheep. Which probably tells you more about the media than it does about me, but it means that I do come to these climate debates with that scientific background. But I would also say that I entirely disagree with most of what Andy said about the politics of this, and I also bring a humanities degree and a social science degree into this. And essentially where we are now, the problems are not scientific. The problems are political. The problems are, as people said from the floor, we have to change this system. Because our current system, and this is the political philosophy that's dominated for the past 40 years of neoliberalism, but also dominated in the 40 years of social democratic consensus before that, that said that growth is the way we improve people's lives. We keep growing the pie bigger and bigger, and so even those who are getting the crumbs get some more crumbs. Now, we actually know, and as Greens we've known for a long time, that you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. Climate change is actually only one of our sets of problems. Craig referred to the issue about nature. Many people don't realise that Britain is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. And we've seen lots of figures coming out now, studies done on insect populations as a measure of how much we're collapsing our biodiversity, our bioabundance. There's the plastics in the oceans, there's the state of our soils. I can get really geeky about soils, but don't worry, I won't do that to you this evening. But all of those things are in a state of crisis, and we cannot have a system depending on growth. Because, as Andy rightly said, we are actually seeing that the amount of carbon emitted as a measure for general environmental damage is reducing as a percentage of GDP growth. But you'll notice that I said reducing. There's an excellent book by a guy called Tim Jackson, Prosperity Without Growth, which sets this out very clearly. You cannot decouple GDP growth from carbon emissions. You can reduce the intensity, but we cannot keep growing GDP. And this is something that's always been central to Green Party political philosophy, saying that economic and environmental justice are indivisible. The pie has to be shared out fairly. That means major system change, while the pie actually gets smaller, but everybody has enough. And in short, if we look at where this is, we're looking at a world, we have a world in which there's enough resources for everybody to have a decent life, while we live within the physical limits of this fragile planet. But it has to be shared out fairly. And if we think about where we are now in Britain collectively, however you live as an individual, I'm really not interested in your individual behaviour, I'm interested in the system change. However you live as an individual, collectively we're all using our share of 3 planets. And we have to come back to one planet living. But I would say, rather than come back to, let's think about rising to one planet living. Because if we think about what our 3 planet living is doing now, it's creating a thoroughly miserable, angry, unhappy, insecure society. If you look at the measures, particularly among our young people, but across whole populations, of mental ill health, we have an absolute epidemic of mental ill health. And that's arising from an educational system in which schools are being turned into exam factories, because we've all got to compete to grow more, to produce more. We have a situation where people are desperately struggling to pay the electricity bill and the gas bill because they live, as Craig was saying, in a house that's essentially uneatable. And we have a problem with fuel poverty in the UK. And I was talking to a group of Scandinavian ambassadors about this, as you do. And one of them came out with the most undiplomatic outburst. She said, "I've never been so cold as I've been in Britain." Now this was a woman from a country where winter is 20, if not 30 degrees colder than it is here. But to her, the idea that a building should be cold was just a really, really odd concept. So the reason why I want to be focusing tonight on the optimistic side of these things is we have to change. And I'm going to remind everyone of the hashtag 12 years left, because I'd really like to see it trending in Liverpool tonight. I've checked and there's no football game, so I think we've got a chance of making that happen. 12 years left. Now, Andy rightly said, you can put all sorts of scientific caveats in that, but it's a really powerful, simple message that people can understand, and that's what we desperately need. We have 12 years to turn things around. And since that message came out, particularly really since the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report last October, we have seen a real change. Today at lunchtime, if you happen to be listening to BBC Radio Merseyside, I had a 15-minute chat with the presenter about climate change. I would not have put any money at all 12 months ago on us getting in contact with BBC Radio Merseyside and saying, "We'd like to talk about climate change." And if I had, and by some miracle they'd said yes, they'd probably have put a climate change denier up on the radio as well, for balance. And that has now changed. The BBC policy has changed. That 12 years message has changed. Now, I think it is in some ways a dangerous message. It's true. Because some people have said 12 years, how can we turn things around in 12 years? But I'll just give you a case study. I was at the climate talks in Katowice in December, and I was throwing around this 12-year idea and trying to think, what else has changed in 12 years? And you know what I discovered? Twitter is only 12 years old. Now, I can still remember as a journalist, because that's been most of my working life as a journalist, the first time, and it must have been, can't have been more than about 8 or 9 years ago, when I saw a story that said, the Iranian foreign minister said on Twitter, and I practically fell over with shock. And of course, Facebook's only a little bit older than that, and when I talk to school audiences, I need to talk about Instagram, which is newer still. And so our whole social laws, our ways of doing things have changed massively in 12 years. We just forget how fast that things actually change. And I would say to you that the need for that environmental change is actually hugely good news. Because as I said to you, we're trashing the planet and creating a miserable society. Now what the Green Party's starting to talk about again, and something we were actually talking about in 2010, because we're picking up off what's happening in America, is the talk is of a Green New Deal. And that's essentially everything that Craig was saying about what we need to do, about transport, about energy, about changing our food system. All of those things are what we need to do for the environment. But the really good news, the optimistic story, is all of those things, changing those things, can greatly improve our lives as well and give us a much better life. One of the things that you might recall the horse meat scandal from a few years ago. For those who don't, it was basically lots of ready meals, particularly, had been adulterated with horse meat when it was supposed to be beef. Now, one of the things that emerged from that was in the UK, we eat twice as many ready meals on average as the rest of Europe. Now, if we actually look at the nature of our society, we also have the second longest working hours in Europe. Might surprise you to know that the Greeks have the longest. And we also have, on average, double the commuting time of the rest of Europe. Now, how about if we could create a situation where people work fewer hours? And there's a big 4-day week working campaign going now. And that will actually objectively reduce our carbon emissions, because people would have to travel to work less, they consume less. But also, if we have more time, we might have the chance to grow some vegetables in our back garden and make a vegetable stew instead. And wouldn't that actually be nice to spend some time at home, maybe spend some time with your family and your friends instead, to improve your life? And if we insulate every home that needs it, the sort of thing doing under a Green New Deal, instead of the dreadful case of fracking gas to produce more gas to heat our homes, if we actually create jobs in every community in the land, small business jobs, skilled jobs, for fitters, for people running the businesses, for accountants, all of those kind of jobs, put solar panels on the roofs, all of the things that we can do, and then we don't need that fracked gas. We don't need the fracked gas now because there are better alternatives. And I had an argument with a former Labour MP who's now the government's fracking czar, and I had an argument with her on telly because she said, I said, fracking just created lorry driving and security jobs. And she said, oh, you're being insulting about security jobs. And I said, no, a security job on a fracking site is a really miserable job because people really don't want your business to be there and you have a thoroughly miserable time. Whereas how much better to have someone fitting insulation instead in every community in the land. So there's lots more to talk about how tackling our environmental crisis also tackles our economic, social, educational crises. We'll get more out in the discussion, but I want to just finish with a few thoughts about how we make this happen politically, because I'm here from the political side of things. And I'm going to slightly disagree with Craig here because he did say, those politicians are terrible. Well, I'm a politician. Not a paid one, but a politician. But what I would say is what we need to do is stop electing the wrong people and hoping they'll do the right things. Now, I fully understand organisations like Friends of the Earth, doing their best to lobby the Tories, yes, to make them a little bit less bad. But actually, what we need to do is elect people who really get it in Westminster, making the decisions, so you can advise them instead of having to lobby them. They are your people. You need your people in Westminster. Now that is, of course, is why you come to the issue of democracy. I think there was some reference earlier, Andy said, oh, you can vote people out. And I think there was a cry from the audience, oh no, you can't, and the audience is absolutely right. In the last election, 68% of votes didn't count. We are not a democracy in the UK. You, the people, are not responsible for our environmental policy or any other policies because you haven't had a say who's there in Westminster, because we have a non-democratic electoral system. So I would say to you that making Westminster a democracy is an environmental climate change issue. And interestingly, there's a lot of good academic work on this. Countries around the world that have proportional representation to democratic electoral systems emit significantly less carbon than the first past the post countries. Give the people the power and they will use it well. And of course that applies to another massive political reform we need, is we need to take that power in Westminster with a fair voting system and a democratic working system. But we also need to take that power from Westminster. As we said earlier, Lancashire said no to fracking. I was outside the Preston Council chamber when they said it, and it was a real struggle and it was really hard, and they said the right thing. And then Westminster immediately overruled them. So we give power to local communities, give them power to invest in renewable energy, in warm, comfortable, affordable heat homes for everybody, in public transport, the sort of public transport that gets people around their local communities, that gets people between northern communities. Now, I entirely agree with what Craig said about HS2. I want to tell you about a friend of mine who's very London, southeast based, and she came to visit me across the Pennines a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, I just kept waiting for the train to speed up, and it never did. Because we haven't had the investment in the north, we haven't had the power and resources in the north. Our political system is a huge climate change barrier. But you might be sitting there thinking, oh, how do I change the political system? Well, there's lots of ideas about that. But what I want to leave you with is one final thought, which is that actually what everyone in this room can do, from the climate striker up the back to everyone else here, wherever you work, wherever you live, wherever you get involved and engaged in your church, involved in the church. Because I have a saying that politics should be something you do, not have done to you. And what we have now is a system. You think of the system as a whole ball. It works, everything's interlinked: economic, social, environmental, political, educational. And wherever you work, if you just start tugging away at one bit of string in that ball and start it unravelling, you're breaking the system. And that could be whether you're at school campaigning to get rid of plastic knives and forks and get proper knives and forks so you can eat your lunch, or you can be campaigning for a fair electoral system, or you can be campaigning to get the council to declare a climate emergency. All of those things are worth doing. All of those things make a difference, and all of those things can deliver us towards that 12 years change that we so desperately need. So remember, 12 years left. Let's get it trending, and let's get it changing everything. Thank you.